Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Frank London is a trumpeter, bandleader, and composer. He's written numerous film scores and music for theater and dance. He won a Grammy Award with the Klezmatics, and he just released an album, Chronika, a Hanukkah album, with his Klezmer Brass All-Stars Band. We're going to hear Tops, the first track on the album. Happy Hanukkah! You wrote the score of the John Sayles film, The Brother from Another Planet, which came out in 1984. Actor Joe Morton plays an alien and escaped slave on the run from his home planet. So how did you come to compose for the film? It was the first film that you ever composed.
Yeah, I mean, this is going back a few days, but yeah, indeed. That was, I was in Boston, and at that point, I hadn't really gotten into Jewish music yet at all. I was mostly doing salsa and Afro-Cuban music, and they needed someone to write some film cues for the salsa. They wanted some salsa, so I wrote all these salsa Afro-Cuban music cues. It's a funny way to start a film scoring thing. And then I went on and did a bunch of films, and actually, I'm doing more these last year or two than I've done in probably the last 20. But my career has always been like that crazy. Things happen, then they stop happening, then they happen again. So, yeah, Pandora, you asked, you mentioned the uniqueness of the drumming in the Afro-Cuban music, and it's certainly true. And I've gotten deeply into the whole history of how that happened with the enslaved African peoples bringing their own cultures over to the New World, the fusions, the because I love the history. But really, as I learned at the same time as I was starting to get into that music, when I was also learning many other musics, including Jewish music, klezmer, but Balkan musics and African musics and Scandinavian, all sorts of things. Each one is unique. Now, we might say that some are a little more complex, or they're complex in different ways. In the last few years, I started studying Korean music, and the way they think about drumming and rhythm is totally different than any other music I've ever studied. But I love the uniqueness of each musical genre. Love the figuring out what makes a music sound like this. How do we know when we hear on a 5 seconds of a music, oh, that's a pop rock tune, oh, that's a this, that's that? What are the signifiers? What do we hear immediately? And really studying it. And the main thing I've tried to do throughout my career, and it's a lot of this is on Chronika, bringing it to the album we're talking about, is not just do the simplistic thing that a lot of people do, where you take a melody from one culture and a rhythm from another culture and put them on top of each other. That's a lot of fun. It's been going on forever. It's always enjoyable. But I always try to go for something more complex, a more complete integration of musics by understanding what makes each one unique, what makes it particular, and then finding subtle ways, or not always so subtle, to blend them together. And that's a lot of what's going on in Chronika. You can't just say, oh, it's Hanukkah songs with a hip hop beat. I mean, partially that's in there, but there's so much more going on than that. And that's what I try to do. Well, one of my many fascinations is with trance musics, musics that put people into a trance state. And let's say like Haitian voodoo music or something like this. And it's exactly like that. They'll talk about that the complexity, it almost drives you so crazy that you go into this other trance, and in their tradition, you actually become possessed because of the drumming. So yeah, I'm totally with you. And the idea of, well, I talk a lot about ecstasy vis-a-vis Chronika, and the whole idea of repetitive rhythms and repetitive dance being ecstatic and almost putting us into trances. That's what it's really all about.
We're speaking with Frank London. This is Greeks off Chronika. So, klezmer music is ecstatic dance music, essentially. So it's part of a long tradition of ecstatic dances that happened. There's evidence for them in ancient Greece and all over the world.
Oh, for sure. What I find interesting, you're absolutely correct, is that some cultures, they all do it, but some talk about it more overtly and others do not. So in the East European Yiddish Jewish culture, they're not going to use that vocabulary to discuss it, but they're doing it. It's exactly the same, but they don't talk about it as a trance because that would go against their kind of cosmology because they were not going to believe. Well, actually, that's not even true because Jewish mythology, Yiddish mythology has Dybbuk. We have possessive demons and spirits also. I grew up on Long Island.
Good though?
Huh?
Are any of the possessive?
Well, that's a really great question. That's very funny. Um, as far as I know, in sort of East European Jewish mysticism, no. No, if you're possessed, it's generally not a good thing. Whereas, let's say, just good to go back to Haitian voodoo practices, some of it is very positive, actually. And if you look at, let's say, African American churches where people get the spirit, it's actually seen as a very positive thing. No, unfortunately, in the Yiddish tradition, it's a little bit more like The Exorcist and the shaking of the body and stuff like that.
What about some of the more ritualistic aspects of Judaism, like the shaking of the lulav?
I grew up on Long Island. I'm Jewish, totally Jewish, but it was a very American Reformed Jewishness that had nothing exotic about it, nothing cultural, nothing anything like that. We didn't shake anything, except shake hands. Nice to see you. Shabbat shalom, but and then I later, through the music, found out about all these different customs. So not only shaking the lulav being the branches of a certain plant, which we shake in, it's almost Native American because you shake it in all six directions. Very much, not to be too cross-cultural, but one can't help but observe that. But the shake, one of my early album covers is a tradition called Kaporis, where to get rid of our sins, we spin a chicken over our head once a year and kill the chicken by spinning it and try to get our sins into the sins of the chicken. There's lots of weird customs. And I find it fascinating. I just, this makes me very excited. And yeah, like okay, for example, there are two numbers on Chronika that really have strong Caribbean influences. One is a Ukrainian Hasidic drinking song, which we added electronica and live cumbia percussion, both from Mexico and from New York City, on into the beat. But more important is a song I co-composed with a Hasidic spiritual melody, but it's all about Crown Heights, New York, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn, which is the home of both a certain Hasidic group, the Lubavitchers, and West Indians. And it's been a terrible relationship for years. There were riots in the 1990s between the two groups. And I wanted to do something with unity between the groups and kind of putting the music together for me is like a metaphor in real terms for the way communities can work together. And I start off with something that musically is taken from Central African pygmy music, but the instruments are shofars, the traditional Jewish ram's horns. So it's really just always playing with the different ways one can connect it. So it's a shofar, this most religious Jewish instrument, playing a Central African rhythm, which then goes into a Caribbean klezmer Hasidic march, And for me, but if you don't know any of that, it's just fun. You can just dance around the apartment or the house to it, even without knowing any of that.
Yeah.
And the singer who we got, Mishach, who lives in Crown Heights, he's known as both a reggae and a soca singer. So yes, what you heard is coming, I would say, primarily from his voice. It's really, he's got that certain sweet tenor voice that I love in reggae music, like Gregory Isaacs or Junior Mervin. I just love that sweet tenor voice.
We're going to hear Unity from Chronika, Frank London's new album.
Jubilation, cooperation, no more frustration. Right now in Crown Heights, Brooklyn is a big celebration. Jubilation, cooperation, no more frustration. Hey, right now in Crown Heights, Brooklyn is a big celebration. Anticipation, the expectation of liberation, celebrating unity, it's a fiesta, a really simple, a conscious party, and the only place to be right here in Brooklyn, on Eastern Parkway, in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Music playing every day in Brooklyn. Ooh, at 770 Eastern Parkway, in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Singing, dancing till the break of dawn. Jump up, wave up, jump up, wave up, jump up. Life is a carnival on Eastern Parkway. Brooklyn's the place where we all go to party. Life is a fair. You have to be there when we celebrate. Here on Eastern Parkway. Jump up, wave up, jump up, wave up, jump up. Come join the carnival on Eastern Parkway. Brooklyn's the place we're gonna have a party. Hands in the air, without a care. One big love, respect, all together in Brooklyn. On Eastern Parkway.
So Frank London of the Klezmatics, Frank London of the Klezmer Brass All-Stars. When did you first become smitten with Klezmer?
I was up in Boston at the New England Conservatory. I was studying jazz, which they called Afro-American music, Afro-American because it was 1977. But there was another department called the Third Stream Department, which believed in learning all musics and integrating them and learning by ear. And I just threw myself into that philosophy. So from someone who grew up with nothing, and I literally mean nothing but kind of rock and roll and soul funk music that was on the radio, like nothing. That's all I listened to. All of a sudden I encountered the world, the entire world of music. And I was playing in Balkan brass bands, and I was in a very popular Boston-based Haitian band, and everything, blah blah blah. And one of the teachers at New England Conservatory wanted to explore. His family had led a klezmer band 2 generations earlier, and he wanted to explore his family history. And so he decided to put together a band at New England Conservatory of students to explore the music of his family. And that became the band called the Klezmer Conservatory Band. And I had never heard this music. I didn't know Yiddish language at all. But it kind of, on one hand, it went into the category of, wow, here's yet another cool music that I've never heard before. Isn't the world such a fascinating place that there are so many kinds of things? But I have to admit that I felt a little pride that my culture, meaning the thing I was born into without any choice, actually had a cool music. I didn't know that we had one also.
You taught Jewish music in Crimea.
I was in Crimea during the brief historical moment where it was actually part of the Ukraine, post Soviet Union, pre Russian invasion. So that's, and you get there, and this is gonna, I'm going to give you a very New York reference. It's kind of sort of very Soviet. So I felt like I was in Lefrak Village in Queens, like one of these just horrible architectural, horrible, like big apartment buildings built of cinder blocks, so ugly. And, like parts of Queens that I'm so used to with projects. And I of course, on a people to people basis, it was one of the highest experiences of my life, and I'm still in touch with many of the people who studied there that week. And that I could talk for hours about the people, but talking about Crimea, so a few things happened that really elevated that experience beyond the people themselves, because people came from all over the former Soviet Union to be part of that, and that was truly amazing. So I was there. I am staying at some horrible thing that they called a hotel. Like I said, it's just like being in a housing project in New York City or something like that. And I was taking a walk, and all of a sudden, I heard some weird music that was not very normal, not Russian, not Western sounding, not Slavic, and it was a military band at a police station playing these basically Turkish marches. And then I was, so as a musician, I was like freaking out. This is amazing. Then I just turned around and I saw someone riding on a camel down the street. And my mind's going, you're not in New York anymore. You're definitely somewhere else. It placed me. And then the final thing is I came across a Jewish building, which we would normally think of as a synagogue or as a Jewish community center, but it wasn't. It's called a kenes, which is the same Hebrew root as the word Knesset, which is their parliament in Israel. A kenes, which basically means a meeting place for Jews who had been expulsed from Judaism as part of what is called the Karaite heresy. And Crimea is one of the few places that has a living Karaite community. And the Karaite heresy, which is thousands of years old and caused them to get excommunicated, is that if you know Judaism, we have the Torah. Torah is a text given by God, and everything about Judaism is based on the Torah. But many people, our entire history says, but you can't really understand the Torah, so it needed to be sort of interpreted. And that's where the rabbis came in, and they were the interpreters of the Torah, and they made, so the Torah is what's called the oral law, because it was given to us at Mount Sinai. But the written law is the Talmud, which is the commentary on the Torah. Okay, you got that backstory now? But it's a political thing. You can look at it totally in political terms. Here's these bunch of guys, it's all guys, who wanted to tell the Jews what they could and couldn't do and make all the rules and say it's based on the Torah, but we understand it in a way you don't. It's a power play. The Karaites said, yeah, stick it up your whatever, because we believe in the Torah only and not a word of your interpretations. It's a total rejection of the power play of the rabbis, which, by the way, is the dominant voice in Judaism throughout the entire world. We all follow the rabbinical Talmudic law, and it's written in Hebrew letters in this kenes in Crimea, respect the Torah and don't change one single word. It's so great. It's so absolute. So they don't have things like, well, you can't start your car on the Sabbath, but you can go in an elevator as long as the elevator is preset to stop at every floor. They're like, no, the Torah doesn't talk about elevators. The Torah just says, do this, don't work. It's so this was a radical thing and a rejection of power. So they got excommunicated, but they have a center in Crimea.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was pretty blown away, actually.
That is very cool.
And the last thing, you got me started. I didn't know we would talk about this. So then I couldn't help myself. I wanted to find out about what is the indigenous local music in Crimea. And the Tatar people. Now, and I'm sorry, we could talk for hours. Their history is as tragic as any people on the planet. The Tatars have been abused, kicked out of land after land. It's just, and it continues. Stalin kicked the Tatars out of Crimea. Then they moved back after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then Putin and Russia invades and kicks them out again. And their music. So I went to a Tatar village, which is another one of these, like, again, New York City housing projects, NYCHA, that hasn't been fixed in years, and met people there. And they play, it's the closest music I've ever heard to klezmer, except they do a lot of it in 7/8 instead of 4/4 in a different rhythm. But absolutely, and we have a deep overlapping repertoire of songs. And I've done, over these last years, many projects with Crimean Tatar musicians because our two musics have so much in common. So it's kind of fascinating. And again, I really don't know what's the chicken and what's the egg, cart and horse, between the Tatar music and the Jewish klezmer music. I don't know who got what from whom, because they're so essentially based on the same music.
We've been speaking with Frank London, trumpeter, bandleader, and composer with the Klezmer Brass All-Stars Band. He just released his latest album, Chronika, just in time for Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah, everyone. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org. Our theme music is provided by Mason. You can find her website at masonmusic.com. That's MAESYN.